Today, I am so thrilled to welcome someone very special to the podcast, the amazing Leah Remillet. I'm just so excited for you to hear this chat that we had. Leah was actually my very first business coach when I was navigating a photography business right here in the US over 10 years ago. And her guidance made a lasting impact on both my business and my personal life. Leah is a sought-after productivity expert and balance strategist, helping moms and entrepreneurs build thriving businesses while still prioritizing what matters most. Her practical tips and relatable wisdom have been game changers for me, and I know you're going to love her as much as I do. So let's dive into this episode. I cannot wait. Welcome to Knit Your Stress Away. I am Nadine Medina, a mom who rediscovered knitting during a stressful season and found it to be the ultimate way to relax, recharge, and reconnect with myself. If you're feeling overwhelmed and wondering if there's a creative outlet that could actually help you feel calmer and in more control, you're in the right place. In this podcast, I'll show you how knitting can be a simple stress-busting tool, even if you've never picked up needles before. So take a deep breath, let go of the chaos for a moment, and let's explore how knitting could become your new favorite way to find calm and joy. Before we dive into this episode today, I have something super exciting to share with you, and you may have seen me drop hints here or there on Instagram in the last few weeks. If you've been thinking about picking up knitting, but you feel either too busy to even figure out how to do it or unsure where to even begin, I've got you covered. Join me for my live workshop, Knitting Made Simple for Busy Moms, which is happening on Tuesday, January 29th at 7 p.m. EST. In just 90 minutes, you'll learn how to knit your very first project from start to finish. Not going to finish it during those 90 minutes, but you're going to learn everything you need to know to start the project while we're in the workshop, as well as finishing it on your own after the fact. You're going to master the basics, and you're going to gain the confidence to use knitting as your go-to stress reliever, even on your busiest days. This workshop is perfect for beginners, and it's going to leave you feeling confident, excited, and ready to tackle that first project. Don't miss this chance to carve out a little time for yourself and discover the joy of knitting. The spots for this workshop are very limited, so grab yours now at theknittingmamas.com/workshop. Again, it's theknittingmamas.com/workshop. And you're going to also find this link down in the show notes. I'm so excited to be doing this workshop again. I hope you're going to be there January 29th at 7 p.m. EST. Welcome back to the Knit Your Stress Away podcast. And I am super excited today to welcome one of my favorite people. It's Leah Remillet. She has been my coach in multiple businesses for many, many years. And I'm just so very excited that I finally have the chance to interview her on this podcast. What is the best part about this is that she is actually an expert on balancing your life, specifically for moms. She is working with moms in business, but I think she has some really incredible things to say to all of you guys who are trying to manage everything, but also put in, time for a hobby like knitting. So welcome to the podcast, Leah. I'm so happy you're here.
It is so much fun. I mean, I would hang out with you any day. So this is fantastic.
Yay. All right, let's start off by talking a little bit about how you ended up with the business that you have today, because when we first met and when I first started working with you, you were teaching me all about building a photography business, which is my past lives passion. Yeah. And so your business has drastically changed now too. And I would love to hear about what your journey was like and why you're so passionate about teaching moms more balance in life. And if there was like some sort of a pivotal change that made this happen for you.
Yes. Okay. So I love business. I love entrepreneurship. It's my playtime. It's so much fun. Like, this is my hobby and my career. I just love doing it. But we can get sucked in, and we all feel this, even if someone isn't a business owner. Maybe they work outside the home, or maybe they don't. They're a stay-at-home mom. They're not working. We all understand how it feels to be so busy, to just feel like we're overscheduled. Everything is so chaotic. We're constantly going from thing to thing to thing, and it affects our happiness. It affects our health, and it definitely affects our homes, right? And so the reality is I got it wrong in the beginning. I wasn't doing it right. And it was affecting everything. So you and I, as you shared, you and I first met when I created my very first course, which was the Thriving Photographer. You were still a photographer. And I think when you and I first met, I was still a photographer. I'm pretty sure.
I believe so.
Right?
I
was
believe
still
so.
shooting.
Yes.
So
you were doing both. Yeah. You
I
were
was doing
definitely
both.
running your own photography business, and you were also a coach for photographers. For
yes.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was drowning. I mean, I wasn't telling anybody that, but it was not good. I mean, because I'm running a full multi-six-figure photography business, a multi-six-figure coaching membership course. I'm teaching mastermind retreats. I'm like, I have a team, but like, there's just not enough hours in the day. And my kids were so young. They weren't even all in school yet. Like, I still had ones that were home all day. I mean, like, I look back and honestly, I'm like, how in the crud? I mean, sheer will, grit, the fact that I was, quite a bit younger. I don't know. But like, I look back and I'm like, how did I do that? And I will share one of the ways that I did that, which was very stupid, which is that I stopped sleeping. So in order to get all of my work done, I would put the kids down at, like 8 p.m. And then I would go into my office, and I didn't mean to do it, right? I'd be like, I just got to finish some stuff. But then I would get into it, and it's like the first time where no one's interrupting me. No one's bugging me. Like, I can actually zone in. And would I zone in? And all of a sudden it would be like 5 a.m. And I did this all the time. And so I learned that I could do it 4 days in a row, 4 to 5 days in a row. Then I had to have one day where I got about 6 hours of sleep, and then I would start my cycle over again. And this is how I was managing all of these different things at the same time. Well, okay, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone listening, hey, that's probably not sustainable. But, at the time I was like, oh, you mere mortals who need sleep. I've cracked the code. This is how I'm doing it. And so one day I was taking the kids to the zoo. So every Wednesday afternoon, I would take the kids on like an outing. And this was my way to feel like a good mom. Like when I say there's 168 hours in a week, and it was probably those singular 3 hours a week that I actually felt like a good mom. That was it. Because the rest of the time, I was so frantic. I was so overwhelmed. I was just trying to keep it all together. But those 3 hours every Wednesday afternoon, I was a good mom where I couldn't be distracted because honestly, we didn't even have smartphones yet. And like, I couldn't take any of it with me, right? Like I was present and I was with them. Well, one day, I'm taking them to the zoo, and we are in the reptile exhibit. We're looking at the alligators, and everything starts closing in. Like it's all like everything's going black. My hearing's going out, my vision's going out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm about to black out. And which I did. I was trying. I can remember I'm trying to get over to a park bench so that I can like collapse on the bench. I don't know if I made it or not, but when I woke up, I'm on a stretcher, like being put into an ambulance. And I lock eyes with my oldest, who at the time I think was 6. And her little eyes are like saucers. They're so huge. She's so terrified. She's holding that would be her 4-year-old sister's hand with the baby in the stroller. And like, she's absolutely horrified because mommy is being taken away. And in that moment, it was gut-wrenching, but it was like, it was my fault. And I mean that in that like, I had created this, right? And before they even discharged me from the emergency room, I vowed like, I will walk away if I can't figure out how to fix this. And so it's funny because like you came in when I was still doing both. One of the things I had to do is I had to walk away from the photography business and be like, hey, I'm just coaching now because I can't do both, right? And over time I started. So my first fear was that balance wasn't real because that's what everybody says. Everybody says like balance is a myth. It doesn't exist. And I'm like, and so far that's my experience, right? Like I was doing a terrible job. And so I'm like, if that's true, like if this is what life is going to be like, this is awful. Like I can't do this forever. I'm going to ruin my marriage. I'm going to ruin my health. My kids are going to have so much resentment, when they grow up, right? So I'm like, I have to figure out if balance is real. And if it is, then I get to keep my business. But if it isn't, I walk away, which was terrifying because I was our sole breadwinner back then. My husband was in graduate school. So it was like, who the crud is covering the mortgage and putting food on the table, right?
Talk
but
about
like
stress, right?
oh my gosh, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And so I started, but I am a very all or nothing personality. That's probably pretty obvious already. But so like, I was like all in. I'm like, if it's possible, I will find it. And I started studying and researching everything about like time management. That's where I started. And a lot of it didn't work because it was like old school for like a corporate world. Like, oh yeah, that works if you get to leave and go to an office and close a door. That does not work when you also need to do the laundry and make dinner and get kids to preschool and back and hope that they'll take a nap and, like all the other things, right? So I started going through everything. I would test it. I'd throw out what doesn't work. I'd adjust what I thought could work, refine it. And then I kept doing this, right? So I started building little systems. That's what it started with because we didn't even have automations yet because like they hadn't, like Zapier didn't exist. Like, like a lot of these things weren't even there, right? So I started building little systems and I was able to start cutting my hours back. And I started outsourcing and I built systems for how I would train them because it's like, if you're at that level of overwhelm, when in the world are you supposed to find time to train someone? Like you're just trying to stay on top, right? Like anyways, it was a whole mess. But I start building these systems. I start figuring out how to create like checklists and customer journeys so that like I don't have one client that gets a great experience and the other client falls through the cracks because it's, was a really rough week or whatever. And I start saving time and all of a sudden my hours are dropping. And then the most magical thing was that my income wasn't like, cause that was the giant fear. Right. And then like, within, 6 months, I was down to working part-time hours, but my income was growing. Like I wasn't even losing income. I'm increasing income. So that was when it was like, oh, okay, balance exists. You have to be intentional. You have to you work at it, but this is real. And then that's when I started shifting and getting really excited about that. So I would teach that stuff like within our communities that you were a part of, right back then, but like, eventually over time, so then we made the decision to travel for 1 year as a family, which was a huge, scary decision because work was like I do love work, right? Like to pull back that much, it was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen, right? But we took our kids and for a whole year we traveled the world. And I was like wanting to have this eat, pray, love moment where I'd figure out exactly what I was supposed to do next and, all these things. And ultimately in the end, when I got down to like, who am I? It was so clear. I am mother. That's who I am. And so it really became like, and secondary, I am entrepreneur because it is in my DNA and I love it, right? And so then it became, okay, I can't be the only mom entrepreneur who struggles with this. And I figured it out and now I've got to show others. And so over time, it just evolved and adjusted. So now I have the Balancing Busy podcast and Mom Business Academy. And everything that I do is around like, let's figure out how to put the right things in the right places at the right time so that we can have time for what matters most, but not sacrifice like our dreams and our passions and, these incredible ideas that I think were given to us on purpose. Like when we have a heart for hobby or a business or whatever, I don't think that's accidental. And so I want to show women how we make time for both things.
I love that so much. And it's so funny. I'm nodding along here because I'm relating to all the things that you just mentioned. Like I went through a very similar moment myself. First of all, I mean, that sounds horrifying what you went through at the zoo. And I've heard you talk about that before. And I was just like, wow, I wasn't there for, I didn't hear about that until like more recently. And I was like, wow, that's scary. And I went through something similar couple years ago. I guess it was before 2020 where I had a panic attack as well. So it was similar. I didn't like quite pass out, but I had to go to the ER myself because I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And they actually thought I had a blood clot in my lung, which is a completely different thing. And that was not it. But it was a moment of like, whoa, hang on a second. Something has to change, right? Yeah. And I love that you say, how did you say that? Do the right things at the right time. So in other words, you said balance exists, and it does, but a lot of people say balance is a myth because they think about it the wrong way, I feel like, right? It's like,
Yes.
oh, everything has to be like exactly, the same amount of everything so that we have like a seesaw situation, but that's not how it works. It's more like...
Right. But that doesn't even make sense when you think about it, right? Like you're like,
exactly.
There's 24 hours in a day. How are you going to give exactly 8 to sleep, 8 to work, 8 to my children, 8 to my husband, 8 to my craft, 8 to cooking, 8 and cleaning? I'm like, that doesn't even work. Of course it can't work that way.
Exactly. And you also mentioned to do the things that matter. And I feel like that's something that, so I talk on this podcast, I talk a lot about mindset, and I call it self-care mindset, because a lot of us are like, I don't have time. And this like this like blanket statement of I don't have time, it kind of goes into all the things, and it covers up the things that actually matter. Like, do you really not have the time to do the thing that you enjoy? Because that's what we want to do. But oftentimes, what do? We grab our phone, right? And we scroll. And it's like, okay, half an hour has gone by. What could we have done instead that would have been so much more meaningful for the purpose that we actually have? Which in your case, you're talking about your children and your marriage. We want those things to thrive. We want to have fun in our work. We don't want our work to kill us and drown us, right? Like, for you to walk away from a business that you loved just to be able to do the other business better, that's one of those situations, right? Where it's like, okay, which one matters more? Which one brings me more joy? Which one actually has the most impact? So I'm going to leave the okay or good one to stay with the best or the better one. And I think that mindset shift is a huge part of what you teach, and a huge part of why I love that so much, because we can't do it all. And a quote unquote balance of everything doesn't exist, but to pick out the things that matter and then put them in a more balanced way, I think that absolutely does exist.
I agree. And I think that when we shift the way we look at balance and realize it's not rigid, it's not about equal parts. But then we have to say like, okay, well then what is it? Right? And balance ultimately, if we try to think of balance as a checklist, right? Like, if I do these things, I will feel balanced. Well, then we're running back into the exact same problem that a lot of us are. We're like efficiency is my love language, right? Like, I love getting a ton of stuff done. I love being efficient, but like that can lead me into a hamster wheel type scenario, because I'm constantly like, how do we get more done? Right. And I got to slow myself down and be like, okay, balance is a feeling. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about a feeling where we feel like life feels good. Like my marriage feels great. My relationship with my kids feels great. My business feels great. My health feels great. My other relationships, with your friends, your extended family, right? That's balance to me. So then it's like, so how do we give the right amount of time in the right places so that each of those things can feel good? Here's what's great. I only need 30 to 45 minutes a day for my health, right? I'm one of those, I like quick and dirty workouts. Like I will work my butt off for 30 minutes and then I want to be done, right? But I have a girlfriend where she loves exercise. It's like 2 hours of her day, but that's her passion. That sounds horrible, right? So but I can have balance in my health, the way that I eat, and the, quick, shorter, high impact workouts, right? Like that's how I find it. Now my marriage, okay, well, how do I make sure I have that feels good? Well, we have weekly date night. I don't have to have it every single day, but I work more days than I have date night, but that it's not about equal, right? So we have weekly date night. We have some things in place where, okay, so every week we have a date. Every quarter we have an overnight, and every year we take a week just the two of us, right? So that's kind of a little system that we have in place that allows us to connect with each other. And then obviously evenings, it's a little different now because our kids are all grown kids. And so when they were young, you put them to bed at 8, right? And then you have the evening. Okay, well, now they stay up later than we do. We only have one left in the house, but we're all hanging out. So, things change and you pivot, but it's not equal time. It's about intentional time. And so I love how you talked about the phone, right? Because I think really the two biggest culprits that are breaking down balance for us are, number one, not being intentional enough, and distraction, right? So the distraction of our phones where it's like, you look up and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been on my phone for an hour scrolling, right? And the thing is it's just a habit. We just have to work on breaking that habit, and replacing it with something else can be really positive, which is why I love like what you're sharing, because it's like, hey, you know what? Like that scrolling thing, you could replace it with something where you make something and you feel like, look at me, like I did something really amazing, right? That feels so good. So just looking at that to be like, okay, how do I get more intentional and more purpose driven so that I am doing the right things at the right time, right? Like when it's family dinner, I'm all in, we're at the table and we're enjoying together. When it's date night, we're not sitting at a table each looking at our phones, we're together. And when I'm working, I'm sure as heck working, and I'm not letting other things distract me.
I love that you mentioned that, because for me, that was my struggle for the longest time. And that's why I like to bring that up on my podcast often, because it's not about just being like, oh, I built in time for this, I built in time for this, and built in time for that. It's actually the follow through that I often struggle with. And, so I have little hacks like, my phone stays in the kitchen overnight. Like I plug it in there. I don't even take it to my bedroom. Talk about it all the time, because I think it can accidentally, suck away so much time that we then are like super dissatisfied, not only because we wasted that time, we lost that time, but we're also like, man, I really wanted to do this. I really wanted to read my book. I really wanted to work on my knitting project, and just adds to the frustration of, already saying I don't have the time. And now it's like, well, great. Now I actually wasted the time that I did have and that I actually planned for that. So this follow through is a big piece of it, I think. And to your point, being intentional about it. Like when it's dinner time and it's nothing else. And that's what we do. And it's something that I find sometimes really hard to achieve, because it's this constant reminder that we have to give ourselves, right? It's like, okay, this is the plan that you made. Follow through. I always said, how did I say that before? It's like, be all in and just stand behind that decision. If you're making a decision that you're going to, go to Instagram, well, then be all in and enjoy being on there for 20 minutes of scrolling, and don't feel guilty after the fact because you just wasted a bunch of time. If you decide to do something, do it all the way. And that's where the intentionality comes in. So I do believe that even as super busy moms, and we all go through seasons. You just mentioned your kids when they were little, it looked a lot different than now that they're, basically flying the nest. And I'm almost there. So I can see, they're more self-sufficient, and you can step away from certain things that you didn't before. But I also love things. What I learned a really great thing from you way back when you were talking about how you're doing, family things in your home. And one thing was Friday movie night, and we totally adopted that. And my kids started calling it cookie movie game night, because we would do video games and we made cookies and we made pizza and we watched the movie. So they would literally tell people about cookie movie game night, because it was a thing. It's like one word.
I love that.
But it was just such a thing to look forward to. And we still do it in some capacity, but again, it's different now that they're older.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's great. But what I do like too is that these 4 years ago when I started knitting again, I loved it so much and I got back into it that I was like, there is no way I'm not going to find time for this. And that is something that I just kind of started dabbling in, talking about and teaching others, because it's hard to believe, right? When you don't have time and you're like running around like crazy, it's like, how am I going to make time for that? Well, if you enjoy something, you will make the time for it. And finding something that gives you that joy is like a big piece of that puzzle. And for us too, work is one of them. I love it just like you do. And I can get sucked into that as well. So I have to be very, very careful with boundaries. You already actually touched on my second question, which was like practical strategies for mom to set those boundaries, but you kind of answered that already. So I'm going to go to my next question. Yeah.
But I would add okay, so, what you just said, it made me think we make time for what matters. And that can be really painful, because we're going around saying, oh my gosh, I'm so busy, I can't, I'm so busy, I can't. And it's like, actually, we all make time for what matters to us. And so sometimes we have to really take a deep look and say like, okay, well, what really matters? And as you were sharing, it made me think about how asking ourselves the question, who do I want to be? And I want to take that a little bit deeper and say, thinking about like, I want to be a knitter. I want to be a reader. I want to be someone who goes out to lunch with her girlfriends, right? Like, okay, if I started making a list of who do I want to be, and I doubt any of us are like, I want to be the person who's always staring at their phone scrolling, right? And so
Love it.
then it's about intention. And like when you said, if you're going to be all in on your phone, like go for it, do it. And what I would add to that is, and set a timer, right? Like so that it doesn't end up being an hour, set a timer 20 minutes from now, tell me to stop and be all in. And then you don't have to feel the guilt. So there's kind of like a little practical tip of like, well, how do we like, curb ourselves off the social media? Because obviously there are some very brilliant minds and millions upon millions being invested on how to keep us in that app. Okay, in all of those apps. And so we need to realize that like we need to also be intentional. They're very intentional on how they're going to keep us there. We need to be intentional on how we're going to have a stopping point. And the simplest, fastest way I've found is I just set a timer that stops me. Or you can go into your phone and you can set this is how long I can be on the app a day. And then it stops you and you have to press the thing that says like, give me another 15 minutes or whatever it is, right? Like those are some very simple ways. I also keep all notifications off of my phone. No notifications come through. So that way I can't get distracted as easy because I do know me. I will get distracted. And so I don't let them give that opportunity.
That's awesome. And it's literally in line with my little challenge that I'm running. It's called the Phone Down, Needles Up Challenge. So we put the phone down and we take the needles instead. And I think, that's like one of those little swaps that I always like to encourage people to do. But I have all those hacks as well because I use them myself and it's the only way for me to have boundaries around my phone. So I love that you shared that. Do you have like a favorite hack or a system that has made a really big difference in balancing your home and your business life? Like anything, I mean, it can be small, but what's your favorite?
Honestly, one of them that it is really small, but like made the biggest difference was setting office hours. It's really hard when you work from home because you can like sneak in, right? I would sneak into my office all the time to take care of something, but then I'd notice one more thing that I should take care of, and then I would stay in there, right? Creating office hours that were more for me than anybody else, where I would say, and I would post them on my door so my whole family could see them so that they could keep me accountable and call me out. And I would say, okay, mom's going to be working from this time to this time on this time, this day, this time to this time on this day. And then I would also put in an hour for lunch. And so for years, my kids ended up all being homeschooled. After we came back from our travel year, that obviously we had to homeschool them during travel year, right? And then when we came back, we thought we'd put them back into school, but we didn't know where we were landing. Anyways, some of them never went back to school. They ended up like staying homeschooled. So that meant I have kids home. I have a husband home because he never really went back after pandemic, right? Like I was like, it's funny because in the early years of putting my kids, of my kids getting into elementary school, it was like, oh my gosh, it was like angels singing because now they all went away for like, 6 hours and I could get all my schoolwork done or my work done in that time period, right? And the hubby was gone. But then everything shifted and pivoted. And, you end up accidentally like you're doing work from your phone. So you're doing it while you're watching movie night or, you know what I mean? It bleeds into everything. And then people feel like they only have part of your attention because the honest truth is they do only have part of your attention. And so setting office hours really was a huge thing that made a really big difference for being able to transition. And then I'm similar to you where I have a lot of times where I do not have my phone with me. My family gets annoyed with me because I never know where my phone is, but secretly I'm so proud of that because it's like I'm not tethered to it. So it's true. I frequently don't know where it is. We have to find my iPhone so that we can figure out where mom put it, right? And so kind of I think the combination of those two things, having set office hours, I don't really work from my phone. So for me, I pretty much just work in my office. And so that works out great because it allows me to keep those boundaries between the two places.
I love that. I really do. And I think that works kind of for everyone, even if a stay-at-home mom also works, right? So it's the same kind of situation. That's a hard job to do. I've done it for so many years. And you can deploy these same like strategies for being a stay-at-home mom or somebody who doesn't necessarily even work in the home. But this day and age, I feel like everybody takes work home and everybody can access their work from their phone and from anywhere really. So those are great strategies to kind of just keep yourself accountable and help others keep ourselves accountable as well. And I guess, and then I wanted to ask this other question too, but we're going to run out of time. So I don't know what you do for your own self-care, but can you kind of maybe elaborate a little bit about how you would encourage other moms to incorporate self-care or any creative hobbies like knitting, what we talk about here on the podcast, into their routines without having this guilty feeling too? Because oftentimes I feel like there's always this toss-up, right? It's like, I either hang out with the kids or I work or I do my thing. But whatever I do, there's always guilt involved because I'm either not hanging out with them because I'm working or I'm not doing work because I'm knitting. And then I feel guilty about that. So what strategies do you use for that?
So the first thing is we have to figure out the stories we're telling ourselves that are around like why we're being neglectful or we're being naughty by like doing these things that we enjoy, and undo that story. Like that's the first step. Like, where is this coming from? Why do I believe this? Is this real? No. How do I know it's not real? Because I've seen this. So that's going to be the very first thing. And then the second thing is I am a fan of kind of stacking things, right? So it's like, okay, I really want to knit. And so while we're all watching the family movie, I'm going to sit there and knit so that I can feel like we're having great family time and I'm enjoying my knitting. So it might, and then, maybe on a Sunday afternoon, I'm like, no, I'm going to sit here and knit and enjoy it. Right. But like a lot of times I stack to help myself feel better. So I love reading. I read normally on a normal year, I probably read 50 books a year. This year, I'm only on 28, so I'm less, but I love reading. And I don't sit down to read. They're all audio, right? And it's like I can stack that where while I'm on a walk, while I'm driving, while I'm cooking or cleaning, right? I can be listening to the podcast or whatever. I love doing genealogy. It's like totally a nerdy thing that I love doing. And that's one of those things where I've chosen to replace like social media scrolling with genealogy. So if I pick up my phone, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do like genealogy for 30 minutes and then I'll, go do something else. So I think if we can just really look at the stories we're telling, and sometimes it can be hard to undo it in ourselves. So for anyone who has daughters, you can think about like, would I want to teach my daughter to think that it's bad to take time for her hobby, for her thing that she loves? And then we can ask ourselves like, well, what example am I setting? Right? So sometimes that gut checks me where I'm like, okay, I'm going to fix this.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, because that is the best way to put it. And that puts us all right back into the right place, because a lot of us are just like, self-care, I don't need that, or it's overrated, or I hate that word, or whatever it is. But you don't. Like, you need it and you need to make time for it. But if you have daughters, I 100% agree. I do that same thing. And my daughters now check me. Like the other day, I said something like, oh, like, bad mommy, I did blah, blah, blah. And it was more like a joke, but they were like, Mommy, you're not supposed to say that. Like, you're awesome. And, and I was like, wow, this is really great. Like, they actually listen to me when I tell them, hey, you can't talk negatively to yourself. It's not good. But I love that you mentioned two things. You were very like tactical with an actual strategy. And I do knit while we watch movies all the time, because you literally can do both. That doesn't go for every hobby, of course.
Right. That's
but
true,
knitting,
right? But
once again,
knitting for sure.
This is exactly why knitting is the thing that I talk about, because you can do it wherever and whenever. Like, you just have to pick a simple enough pattern. But that's one of the many benefits of why this is such a great thing for moms, but also the stories and the mindset. And I love that you mentioned that too, because I always think it's twofold. We need tactical, but we also need to really think about those stories that we're telling ourselves, because a lot of it is rooted in there. And I don't care what anybody says. Every mom out there needs time to herself without feeling guilty. And oftentimes it's literally the smack in the head. Like, stop believing that. Stop believing that that's not what you deserve, because it is. And it takes a long time to undo those. And for me, the biggest thing is, to your point, is to pass that mindset on to my daughters, because it sure as heck was not passed on to me. Right. And I'm carrying it, and it's heavy.
Yes.
And,
me too.
Just undoing it for them. gosh, I have goosebumps now because I mean, that's really what it's all about, right? So I love that we can close on this note because again, I always tell people this, but I always find it so hard because it is a hard thing to do and it just needs a lot of repetition. So thanks so much for that.
Yeah. And, we're at different times where we can finally hear it, right? Like we could say the same thing over and over and it's like, I'm just not in a place where I can quite hear it. And then I'm in the right moment and I hear it and I'm like, oh, thank you. And that's why it's not a bad thing to keep hearing, someone will sometimes say like, oh, I've already heard that. And I always think like, oh, be careful. Like, if you've heard it, now you're ready to take it to the next level. Like if I call it the growth Grinch and I'm like, no. Like if I've already heard it, then I start to think that I'm like, whoa, stop yourself. Then you're at 2.0 level now. So now you can like elevate and bring it to another version. Yeah.
I agree. And we have to hear something like 10, 14, 15 times before we actually hear it.
Because of like how bad we all are now.
Distraction.
Like so much
attention
distraction.
span went down.
Yeah, now it's like insane amount of time, the amount of times we need to hear something.
Exactly. So you just heard it again right here on the podcast. Okay, last thing, Leah. First of all, thanks so much for the interview. I love talking to you. All your insights, fantastic. And I know that everybody got so much out of this episode. Where can people find you? You have a podcast too. And
yes. Yeah. So they're obviously already in their podcast app. So Balancing Busy is my podcast. So I would say pop out of this podcast, go find Balancing Busy, follow that podcast. And if you want to go further than that, you can come find me at balancingbusy.com.
Lovely. Thank you so, so much. And it was amazing to have you on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for hanging out with me on today's episode. I hope you're walking away with a bit more inspiration and a few ideas to make your self-care a priority. If today's chat gave you a little boost, I'd love it if you could leave a 5-star review on iTunes. This helps other moms discover the podcast and start finding more calm and creativity in their day as well. And don't forget to join us over in the Knitting Mamas community on Facebook by going to theknittingmamas.com/group. Thanks again, and remember, you deserve time for yourself to recharge and feel your best. Catch you next time on the Knit the Stress Away podcast.